Law at Queen Mary University of London. You're joining us from London, sir. Thank you very much for your time. What, to your mind, is the clearest example of Israel using food as a method of war, as it has been accused of doing by the International Criminal Court? Specifically, the Prime Minister and his former defense minister have been accused of doing that.
Well, famine has a history, and everything that we're witnessing now, or a lot of what we're witnessing now, has a history, and we can discuss it later. But what we've been seeing in the past few months is the restrictions and denial of humanitarian aid to different parts of Gaza. We've seen the wholesale destruction of the ability of the Gazans to produce food, whether it's the greenhouses, whether it's the orchards and the fields, or it's the fishing vessels. So the Gazans can no longer produce their own food due to the Israeli destruction. And at the same time, as you mentioned before, we see really widespread restrictions on the ability to transfer food to the population.
From the point of view of international law, how substantial is the evidence? And I ask you this question because for more than a year, for 400 plus days now, this has been a matter for politics, for diplomacy, for media reporting, but now it is a matter of international law because there are arrest warrants out issued by the International Criminal Court. So how substantial is the evidence that the prosecutor can provide?
So, as you know, we have not seen the evidence by the prosecutor, but from what I have been following, there's quite substantial evidence. First, there's the intent, and we have utterances both by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Gallant saying that they intend to deprive the Palestinians in Gaza of fuel, of electricity, and food. Second, we have the level of trucks that were entering the Gaza Strip before October 7th, which was around 500 trucks. And as you said, it has gone down recently to only 50 or 100 trucks a day. And Israel, since Israel's controlling all the borders to the Gaza Strip, that is evidence that it's not providing the necessary foodstuff. And finally, we have also evidence from doctors and different UN agencies that have been telling us now for months that malnutrition is spreading among the population. In several places, there's over 20-30% of children are suffering from acute malnutrition and indeed from wasting, which is the most severe cases of malnutrition, which will cause irreversible cognitive and physical damage to these children. So evidence is ample.
You mentioned history, and you have written that Israel has a history of using food as a weapon. Can you explain?
So, I mean, from 1967, Israel has been using food as a way of managing and controlling the population. But I will just go back 2 decades or a bit less than 2 decades till when the siege was implemented, the hermetic siege on the Gaza Strip. Israel began counting the calorie intake of the Palestinians, namely how much calories of food it will allow to enter the Gaza Strip, and limited dramatically not only the amount of food, but the different kinds of foods that could enter the Gaza Strip, using it every time when there were a spike of violence, limiting the amount of food that could enter the Gaza Strip, and using it as a kind of threat, as a kind of weapon to get concessions from the Palestinians. And in fact, there are tables with calories, amount of calories that children need, amount of calories that women and men need, and how much Israel has allowed through the borders. What we do know also is once the food enters the Gaza Strip, who is to say that it will be distributed evenly? And nowhere in the world is food distributed equally among the population. The assumption of these tables is that they are. So already before October 7th and the onslaught on the Gaza Strip that followed, many Palestinians were suffering from malnutrition due to the kinds of restrictions that Israel had been using for years.
Neve, you mentioned the tables of calories and the calorie counts. It's quite notable because actually the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu mentioned calories at his speech at the UN General Assembly back in September. And he mentioned it in the context of, his quote was something along the lines of, Palestinians are getting 3,000 calories a day. That's what he was saying, which is enough for any human. So all this talk of starvation is not only blown out of proportion, but completely false. Could you address that?
So first, I would question the number of 2 million people times 3,000 calories a day entering the Gaza Strip. I think that is a false claim and that Netanyahu was not speaking truthfully. But even if he were speaking truthfully, and he would have had to allow 500 trucks a day in, and we know he's not speaking truthfully. But even if 500 trucks were entering the Gaza Strip every day, who is to say that the distribution is equal? What we know is that Israel has constantly restricted UNRWA from distributing the food throughout the Gaza Strip. We know that Israel has created roadblocks and checkpoints within the Gaza Strip, not allowing humanitarian aid to enter certain areas. So, for example, in northern Gaza today, it is obvious that they are not receiving 3,000 calories a day there. It is obvious that in the south, they're not receiving 3,000 calories a day. So it's based on a lie, but even if it were true, it wouldn't necessarily mean that all the population was receiving the amount of food they need so as to not suffer from malnutrition.
Neve Gordon, Professor of International Law at Queen Mary University of London, thank you for joining us on Al Jazeera.
Thanks for having me.
Robbie Sabel is a professor at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He's also a former legal advisor to the Israeli Foreign Ministry, and he joins us from West Jerusalem. Mr. Sabel, it's good to talk to you again. We've spoken before, and at the time you had argued in defense of Israel from a legal point of view. Now, if the Israeli Prime Minister ever saw the inside of an international courtroom, since there is now an arrest warrant out for him, he would face an uphill battle defending himself, specifically on these accusations of using starvation as a weapon of war, wouldn't he?
I don't think so. Frankly, we were dismayed by the decision of the International Court for a number of reasons. First of all, there's no mention of the fact that Hamas has been using schools and hospitals for its military activities. They've been continuing to fire rockets into Israeli towns, doing it even the last few days. This hasn't been mentioned. There was no mention of the horrific attack on 7th of October. In other words, the picture is that Israel sort of out of the blue attacked Gaza, which is not true. The second is we are not preventing food entering into Gaza. What's happening is the food trucks are being pillaged in Gaza by Hamas, who then sell it at tremendous profit to themselves to the civilian population. And there's no doubt that the civilian population there is suffering. They're in a war zone, and they're suffering because of Hamas activities. And the other issue that disturbs us is they issued an arrest warrant against one Hamas person whom they know is dead, Mohammed Daf. No arrest warrant was issued against any of the real leaders of Hamas who are still alive and living abroad in Qatar, in Turkey, only against the one dead Hamas. And jurisdiction is a problem. Israel is not a party to the to the court. Neither is Russia,
Okay.
nor the United States, nor China, nor most
Mr.
Arab
Sabel,
states.
can I jump in because you've made many
Nevertheless,
points? You've made
Can I just please
well,
just
no,
continue?
because you've made many points. We want to hear more from you, but if we have to address your points one by one, otherwise it's really hard to have a conversation. So, you've made four distinct points. I don't know if I have to address if I have time to address all of them. One is you say we're dismayed that there's no mention of October the 7th. That's not the purpose of the ICC. They've issued an arrest warrant against Hamas leaders. They've issued an arrest warrant against the international criminal, against the Israeli prime minister.
Against one dead Hamas leader.
Well, yeah,
which is strange.
Excuse me, who killed him?
We killed him. He was a
precisely.
Killed him. He was a combatant.
So that's not the court's responsibility.
Well,
they had
originally
three arrest warrants were
against
requested against Hamas leaders, right? Arrest warrants were requested against 3 Hamas leaders for facts going from October to May. And 2 have been killed by Israel, confirmed. The third one, Israel says it killed him. Hamas hasn't confirmed, so there's a bit of a question mark.
We've confirmed that he's dead.
Yeah, you have, but the court hasn't been able to confirm it independently. Hence, they issued their arrest warrant.
Yes, but why didn't they issue against the people whom they know are alive? It's rather strange, isn't it?
The arrest warrants were issued against Hamas leaders of the time. The political leader, he was killed. The leader in Gaza, he was killed. The leader of the Qassam brigades, you just said that Israel killed him. All right, so that's okay. It's hardly the court's fault that
arresting him is rather strange.
Okay,
that's all.
well, okay, you may think so, but the viewers at least have the fact that arrest warrants were issued against 3 Hamas leaders, the political wing, the military wing, and the leader in Gaza. Israel killed him. All right. Otherwise, they could have seen the inside of a courtroom. You mentioned also that. Excuse me, I'm just going through your points here. Yeah, so going back to the previous guest, you heard that there's a lot of evidence that Israel has blocked food entering Gaza. Do you deny that evidence exists?
Yes, we are allowing food in. We're not allowing arms in. We are allowing food in, and the trucks there have been pillaged by Hamas and then sold to the poor civilian population.
Do you acknowledge that Israel's leaders, whether it's the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu himself or his then Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, as well as others, imposed a total blockade, a total siege on Gaza Strip, and told the public and the world that that is what they were doing in the early days of the war?
No. We stopped electricity and fuel for a short period and then allowed it again because it was affecting hospitals. Food has been allowed all the time.
But that's wrong, sir. You know that the quote, the Gallant quote is no food, no fuel, no water, no electricity. Food. I don't know why you leave food off the list. It's on the list.
But food was in fact allowed.
So if you actually look at the number of trucks.
Continue with the other points.
Sorry, I beg your pardon?
So you wanted to continue with other points?
Well, this is the main point. Continue. There's an arrest warrant out for using starvation as a method of war against the Israeli Prime Minister and the Israeli Defense Minister. I'm telling you, they actually told the world, we will not allow food to enter Gaza. You're telling me they didn't, but they did.
In fact, food was allowed. There was bellicose statements just on the days of the attack, and then food was allowed. But you're right, there was a problem with fuel, which was being used by Hamas. But in the end, we allowed certain limited amounts in order to enable the hospitals and bakeries to continue. But we did not want to provide fuel to Hamas that was firing rockets at us.
But so limited, that's the key word, isn't it? That's the key word. So in the beginning, there was no food entering, and then there were a few trucks entering. And if you look at the numbers, hold on. If you look at the numbers provided by Israel, by the way, and we stated those numbers before the interview. If you look at the numbers provided by COGAT, which is Israel's Agency for Humanitarian Affairs, they actually say the number of trucks they allow in. So pre-war was 500 trucks a day, right? And then in October 2024, we cited the number. It was dozens of trucks. It went up to 200, so less than half, in around May, April. And then now it's back down to 50 or 80. So in other words, a fraction, we're talking about 10% of what Gaza used to get. That is why the Prime Minister is being accused of using starvation as a method of war.
Can I comment on that? Of the 500 trucks which we used to allow in, we allowed in cement and steel that was used for building tunnels. That was included in the 500, and you're absolutely correct. We've stopped allowing that. But food has been allowed. Please continue.
Okay, so the UN ambassador to the U.S., Linda Thomas-Greenfield, said, quote, in October 16th that Israel must do more to address the intolerable and catastrophic humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Several dozen aid trucks have entered northern Gaza, but that is not enough. After that, the U.S. Secretary of State and Defense Secretary wrote a letter to Israel saying Israel wasn't doing enough. So there is nobody outside of Israel that actually believes enough food is allowed to enter the Gaza Strip.
Israel is under attack, not the United States and not Belgium. We've been attacked on the 7th of October. They've continued to fire rockets at us. We're in a war situation. And we're doing what most states at war don't do.
But that's not the point. The point is using starvation as a method of war, yes or no? And that's the reason for which there's an arrest warrant out against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Stopping them for getting arms and concrete and steel that they use. We are preventing them doing it. We're allowing food in. And the food, as I said, that has gone in has been pillaged by Hamas. They haven't distributed it to the civil. They've sold it at a high profit to the poor civilian population.
There's been no evidence of that.
And I'm not denying the civilian population in Gaza is suffering. There's no doubt. They're in a war zone. They're being exploited by Hamas, and they're suffering. There's no doubt about it.
Robbie Sabel, you've made your points. It's good to talk to you again. Thank you very much for coming on Al Jazeera. You're a professor at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and also a former legal advisor to the Israeli Foreign Ministry.
Thank you.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.